Hello there, interwebs. I hope you're all doing well, and I am back here at my toy shelf, which has kind of become like the place where I do just these little chats with all of you, I guess, now. And I'm going to do something probably a little bit dangerous, and that is wade into the online discourse surrounding Avatar: The Way of Water. And I say dangerous because I feel like anytime someone touches this discourse around this movie, it ends up being toxic no matter what your opinion on it is. You know, there are people being like, you know, they wanted the first movie to fail because they said the first one was sucked and was offensive and had no cultural impact. And then there are now people on the other side being like, now it's made $2 billion, so suck it and never bet against James Cameron. And I think there's a lot of things to talk about with Avatar, given that it is like some of the highest grossing movies of all time. Talk about the technology. You could talk about the very offensive indigenous coding of the Na'vi, and I say that quite literally, like James Cameron himself has said that like the Na'vi were meant to evoke a specific indigenous American tribe, and whoo boy, it's definitely problematic to get into this sort of like, oh, let's have you know, the white guy take on literally the body of an indigenous coded character and fight back against the oppressors and sort of redeem ourselves for that culturally. That's a whole discourse that I certainly think we should talk about. But really what I am here to discuss is some of the stuff that the Avatar sequel added to the narrative of the first Avatar. Because my big problem with Avatar 2, beyond just sort of the problematic stuff, is that it really is just the first film again, regurgitated. It even has the same villain, has some of the same beats. It just sort of changes environment to a water environment. However, that being said, while the movie is mostly a just restating of the first film with a new environment, there are a couple new things that the sequel movie did add to the narrative. And what I am frustrated about is that most of the discussion that I've had has not really centered a lot upon that. And also, I want to talk about my disappointment with some of the ideas that the sequel brings up, but doesn't really explore in any detail. The sequel film kind of brings up two interesting ideas that are kind of interlocked with each other that I think are super interesting, but the film never dives deep into. And that is the idea of sort of reincarnation and transhumanism, as well as parenthood. And these are themes that are throughout the film. We have Jake Sully has now a family that he's taken care of, and he sort of has to wrestle with, like, do I treat them as soldiers in this war, or do I sort of let them have their own agency and the dangers of that? You also have the Sigourney Weaver character, played by Sigourney Weaver, who is, as we learn in the film, kind of a offspring of the planet itself, but also the daughter of Sigourney Weaver's character from the first film, but also like a reincarnation of her in a way too. Like quite literally, she's again played by Sigourney Weaver playing a kid, which is very weird in the film, but I kind of like the idea that it's getting at about like this idea of like childhood and reincarnation, and is a child a sort of an extension of the self, of the extension of a person, versus like their own independent being separate from their parent. And it sort of articulates this interesting push and pull about how Western society views kids. Because I think one of the biggest things that we often see, I quite often see when I talk about like LGBTQ rights and trans rights, but I think it appears in numerous other things, is parents seeing their kids as really just an extension of themselves and wanting their kids to be just like them, and so being very controlling and protective of them and wanting them to live a certain way. So a lot of the time where I see like, you know, anti-trans bigotry coming from parents to their kids, almost this like fear of their child not living the quote-unquote normal lifestyle. Oh, my kid has to live the way that I want them to. I want to see them as an extension of me, and sort of comes out in this very controlling way. Versus where we kind of should see kids as their own autonomous people who need guidance and help and to give support to, but are their own person. As a full feeling about the world, but it's just learning how to be in the world because they don't have the same experience that we do. And so those are the sort of like the two sort of things that I think are really interestingly evoked in the idea of the Sigourney Weaver character being both a reincarnation but a different person of Sigourney Weaver. And then you have the same idea literalized in the character of the villain from the first film, who died in the first film, but in this movie has like downloaded his brain into the Na'vi sort of avatar body. And what's interesting about that is he sees himself as a separate entity from the villain of the first film. Like, he's like, I'm not that guy. That's an interesting concept. but it's never really dove into in any particular depth. Because, for example, when he wakes up, he's just sort of like, oh, now I'm in this avatar body and I'm going to do the same mission that the previous me was doing. And he's sort of being literally used by the military apparatus within the film. But I'm just sitting there being like, well, if you view yourself as a separate entity, why are you not wrestling with this existential crisis of like, why am I doing the same thing that he wanted me to do? Why am I also working for this big system that is forcing me to do these things? I've only, if I view myself as a separate entity from him, I've only ever lived in this Na'vi body. So why do I not feel an affinity more for the Na'vi? Why am I just working for this military apparatus? None of that is dissected. He just literally goes full Marine and it's like, hoorah, let's do this. And the only time it gets interesting is when he learns the villain from the first movie, who's like he's a reincarnation of in a way, has a kid. And there's this sort of wrestling with like him being like, I don't view you as my kid, I reject you, but now at one point he does. And so there's that interesting idea of like childhood is an extension of ourselves, but then also like reincarnation intertwined as well. Like these are all really cool concepts that I really, I write about a lot in some of my own fiction writing and stuff that I do. So I find them deeply fascinating and tying in with transhumanism and viewing like technology is also a continuation of ourselves and sort of eliminating this very like Western fear of like technology and offspring coming to kill us. Like that's like this sort of Oedipal thing of we have this deep fear of like technology and children killing their parents. It comes out even in like things like The Matrix or like Terminator, where like we create these AIs or robots who eventually turn on us and kill us. And that's a very Western fear. Instead of viewing them as like kids that can have their own life after us, we very much fear that they're going to kill us. So I think these concepts are really cool. But what frustrates me most about The Way of Water is it just has them there, and it touches upon some cool ideas and never does anything interesting with them. And I just wanted to rant about that a little bit because, like, I just was very frustrated because, yes, Avatar: The Way of Water, I think, has a lot of issues, not the least of which is the very problematic sort of white savior narrative that one would have thought James Cameron, after 13 years, would have at least done some self-analysis of and at least said something about it in the sequel, but nope. So there is that. There is the fact that it is just a very pretty movie that's not saying all that much, in my opinion, but also that there is sort of a cultural, like, desire to go see films like that. And what does that mean? So I think there's a lot to discuss, but the thing I've just never seen anyone discuss is this, like, transhumanism parentage idea that the film just, like, has cool ideas about and then does nothing with. And I think there's some really cool like stories and other things that I've seen evolve those ideas further. And so it saddens me that it gets touched upon in one of the biggest things ever that's released and doesn't get fully explored, because it's a concept to me that I find fascinating, like duplicates of selves, juxtaposing yourself against a different version of yourself. As a trans person, that idea, like a past version of myself and a new version of myself sort of juxtaposed against each other, and do we see ourselves as separate beings, I think is a idea that very much resonates with me in my own head, but also I think just extends to how we view the future, the past, our offspring, our relationship to all of those things that the movie just doesn't do anything with. And it was very frustrating. It was very pretty, though. So that's my thoughts on Avatar: The Way of Water. I'd love to hear your thoughts down below if the comment section hasn't been completely destroyed by now. Love you all. Take care of yourselves and live long and prosper.